Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for the latest Festival of BIM and Digital Construction webinar. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of our sponsors, especially Imagine It, who are our sponsors for today's session. Today's webinar will feature a panel discussion on mitigating risk in construction. This will be followed by a second panel discussion on Let's Talk Legal Aspects of BIM. Please take the opportunity to ask any questions you have for our speakers by submitting them into the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. Over to Imagine It.
And thank you everybody as well for joining. My name is Joe Iconsu. Let me go ahead and start my video here along with some of the others and adjust. There we go. As was mentioned, we're here for our panel discussion, talking about risk in construction. How can we mitigate it? What can we do to work through it a little bit better? To help set the stage for this a little bit and work through what we're actually going to be talking about, let me share my screen for a moment. And knowing that we all tend to love the whole idea of PowerPoint or things like that, we're not going to spend any much time on that, but wanted to take a moment, be able to, associate names with faces. Yeah, I know you've got the little name down there to be able to read through it as well. But the people that'll be, chatting it up for the next little bit here is myself, Joe Iconsu. My role in the company is the director of our Building Lifecycle Solutions team, which in short just means that I get to work with all of our trainers, consultants, people that have anything to do with buildings, whether it's design, construction, or facilities management. So that's the quick part about that. Jim, yourself.
Hey, my name is Jim Stormberger. I'm a solutions consultant here at Imagine It. That means that I get to do everything that Joe tells me to do. So my background is architecture and construction for a long time, and then I came over to this world. So yeah, so that's what I do now.
Awesome. And Norman.
Hi, I'm Norm Aiken. Let's see. My background is architectural construction and manufacturing. I'm an applications expert, so I'm the guy who dives deep into the software. So sometimes I'll go over the edge. These guys will push me back. So I'm glad to be here.
Awesome, thanks. And to do that foundation setting that I was mentioning when we're looking at this, when we're into that idea of establishing and working through minimizing risk in construction, we're talking about doing that by, as it says here, maximizing your predictability. In the context of what we'll be talking through in our panel discussion here is really what are the types of things we can do to digitize, integrate, go through analytics to be able to make some things happen so that we can maximize that predictability. As we're doing that, it'll be whether we're talking about more than one application or if we're working within a single interconnected platform, there's going to be all sorts of different things that we'll need to be able to talk about it. How is data moving from design into pre-con, into executing in the field, to handover into operations? What do you have for understanding the things that are happening that might not be good or trending in a negative direction, or whatever we've got to be able to pull together to get some good data, because it's really about data that really is the core of all this. It's the data that allows us to make decisions, to understand what's happening so that we can take appropriate action, so that we can go through and minimize that risk that is associated with safety, with quality, with managing, controlling your project. And all of those are the types of things that when we're, for the purpose of what we're talking about here, it's going to be running through that idea of some level of digital platform. So there's maybe some places it might be obvious, in some places it might not be, but we're looking at saying, what can we do from a data standpoint that takes away from the analog, the paper controls that we have, and better tools that we have to manage and work with that in a digital form. And from that, because it's in that digital world, we can use our own sort of data and reporting to be able to understand what's happening with the project, or conversely, we can use different levels of AI to help us with predicting what's happening. How is project performance going? what's happening with the incoming weather that might impact a project? What are some overall dashboards that we might be able to look at to understand things when there's so much going on? There's so much data that is out there that can be useful to us. We need to be able to have a way to collect it and analyze it. And sometimes there's so much of that data that analyzing on our own can be challenging. So what do we have for digital systems to be able to help us with those analytics, that AI that we're talking about? So it's all about giving you the information you need to be able to make proper choices, and sometimes digging through and churning through that information so you can make appropriate decisions. And again, from that, those decisions mitigate and minimize the risk that you have going on inside a project. So that's our foundation for what we have in the overall project and then conversation that we're having through here. I've got one formalized question that I'm going to be starting off with. And if we accept this foundation as what we are from where we need to be from a starting point, you know, when we're pulling through, I guess I had another slide here talking about the same things, whatever. But if we're pulling all this through and we want to be able to classify things as what are my high risk issues? How many of them are there? What projects have these volumes of high risk issues versus low risk issues or performance issues, whatever might happen to be the case? How do we go about getting that data? How do we go about collecting all of this information so that we can go through this level of analytics? That's all I had for setting the foundation for the conversation here. And I guess my question, this one formal thing that we have to kick things off, is I want to throw this over to Norm and let you run with it to start our conversation. But when we are looking to collect all of this data to help us out with understanding what's happening, to analyze risk, to minimize that risk on our construction projects, how do we go about and do it? And over to you now.
Okay, Joe. Well, that's a good question. How do we gather data? You know, if we look at the old process, and do I need to share my screen here? Let's see. If we look at the old process of gathering data, we have rolls of paper, tons of paper out in the field, and the superintendent may draw some red lines on it, and it may get back to the trailer. I remember on one morning early in my career, I was walking to work and they were building a building, and this piece of paper came floating down from the top of the building, and I looked at it and it said, move drain 5 feet to the left. And I'm pretty sure I've got the only notation of that anywhere. I kept it all these years. But that just made me think, well, how do we start putting the data together? And I'm reminded of a hospital that a project that we worked on in Ohio, where we first started using digital collection. We were using BIM 360, but it was, you know, we would gather the data through the iPads, through, you know, at the time BIM 360 wasn't available for phones, but we would take that data, and at the end of the day, we would make the reports. And how we did that, we created custom checklists that every day someone would take the checklist. They would check out what they did. Let's see, I want to say digital cameras weren't very effective. Back then it was I want to say it was like the Sony 2.1 megapixel pictures, but we could attach those. And through the checklist, we could see where issues would arise, and we could take and evaluate those issues. So, you know, like the floor is cracked here, we've got a, you know, construction issue there, or we have something going on. And then at the end of the day, we could run the reports and set those up to come back and say, hey, you know, we've got a deficiency here, here, and here. And let's see. And through modern technology, it's even faster. We've got our phones. And then when we have an RFI, okay, for example, is this door too big? You know, that's a standard thing. Sometimes we'll get 70-inch doors, sometimes 74-inch doors. And it's like, well, it's cut out for a 70-inch door. So what's this door doing here? And we could track that very easily, come back and do a quick analysis. And then once the reporting is sent, it's sent to a program dashboard where we can do those analysis. And the tools we use now, we've got BIM 360 Insight and Power BI.
So when you're collecting things and working through it now, is to get the data in, is it really all that different from, you know, when you made that change and started using iPads and then later on phones and other things? Was it a dramatic shift from the way people were working before to be able to start collecting that data for analytics, or was there much of a shift to be able to get there?
It was okay. It was the mindset.
Okay.
My old superintendents on the job would say, "Oh no, the technology will never work." And I walked into the trailer one day, and the superintendent had his iPad on the wall in clock mode. And so it's a matter of training him, getting his mindset correct, so that he would say, "Technology is here to help me. It's not here to hurt me. It's not here to take my job." And so it's difficult if people don't want to change, if people want to stay the same, but it's
Sure.
the same process of putting the information in, whether manually through writing it down with a pencil and paper or manually typing it in on the iPad. Okay,
Gotcha.
and now we can barcode pieces and equipment and just scan the barcode and have that data instantly put in.
Gotcha. So I guess it's the equivalent of going back to one of my previous worlds. If we go way back a little bit, trying to make sure that people know not to put the floppy disk on the fridge with a magnet, because that tends to make things not work.
Or use the CD-ROM as a cup holder.
Right. Some of those classic things. So we've got that first part of collecting the data, and there's just various digital things, checklists being one of the major items that I heard, or at least registered with me as you were talking. But collecting all that information to get into some sort of repository. We're going from paper to digital. Maybe throw this over to Jim, but if we've got that data and we're looking to take this something to minimize risk, what are the different ways that you've got for how you can take some of this checklist and other data to help minimize, let's say, in terms of safety on a job site?
Sure. So kind of, I think as Norm talked about, I mean, we're collecting a lot of information, collecting a lot of data.
Safety, quality, whatever you want to go to, sorry.
Right, and even outside of the actual categories, I mean, you're getting information from RFIs that are coming in, issues that are logged, questions, even transmittals, information that's going back and forth, shop drawing submittals. All this information is coming in, and specifically with BIM 360, it's all being tracked, it's all being logged. So the great thing about BIM 360 is that it's all inside of that one environment. That project is the project. So you're not necessarily doing work outside of what you traditionally do. You're just, it's a way of capturing and keeping all that data in one place. Norm, as you talked about, you don't have the paper falling from up above and wondering, what is this for? Where does it go? It's all being tracked. So, traditionally we have all the data, and a lot of it goes untouched in terms of analytics. We don't use it. We have it, and it's all part of the project. Even if we have the greatest of a filing system and everything's kept in order, what are we using it for? So we can use that data for analysis, and specifically, Joe, as you mentioned, things like safety. So if you look at like risk analysis, we can use that information as sort of a predictor for things like quality and safety. In BIM 360, we have dashboards and reporting mechanisms. So if you look at the dashboards, BIM 360 sort of at its core is really built to visualize in ways that you should be taking action to hopefully minimize a lot of the risks. So,
right. So let me take a note
Yeah,
for
yeah,
that,
go
based
ahead.
off one of the questions we had that came through here. We've got a question that came in from John and the challenge of interpreting data correctly. So if we're looking at this and you're talking, quality issues for whatever's going on site, what do people need from a skill set, or do you think people in the construction team, in the broad sense, have the skills that they need to be able to interpret the data that's coming through, to be able to make decisions or interpret correctly the data for quality issues or whatever's going on in the field? Does that change any?
No, it really doesn't change. It's really just a matter of understanding how to input the information. So once you understand how to create what's called an issue in BIM 360, and it's traditionally what you know of. You're making notes, you're even taking photographs, you're making sketches, you're doing whatever, you're reporting a problem. So as long as an individual has the understanding of how to deal with and interpret what that problem is, it's just a matter of knowing how to use those tools inside of BIM 360. But BIM 360 has the ability to it has that construction IQ, where it can look at all the risks and look at all the factors coming into play. And BIM 360 actually breaks things down into categories. So it'll categorize job site issues. So it looks at things like the traditional construction risk factors. So things like caught in between, or struck by, or something that's an electrical risk or a fall risk. I mean, those are the major things that always cause a lot of job site safety problems. So BIM 360 will automatically categorize all of that and then show you in the list that you set up in your dashboard of, hey, these are the top issues you need to take care of because they fall into those categories of taking care of it. So to answer your question, Joe, and to John's question, it's not necessarily a matter, maybe it was Andrew's question, sorry. It's not necessarily a matter of knowing how to use the tool. It's a matter just of reporting the same information that needs to be reported, but there's nothing special that you have to know and understand about it.
So if I were to summarize, would it be fair to say, if you're collecting data in the right way, interpretation of the data is not a significant challenge?
Correct.
Because
in a lot of ways, you're not manually interpreting anything. The interpretation is coming from the tool itself based on how you've asked it to interpret for you.
Okay. So then maybe from the side of looking at things from a risk and safety, and I had Jim talking for a little while here, but Norm, from your side, if we're looking at it from risk issues, safety, quality, you name it, your vision on things of what are the types of things that we've got that can be helping to identify those types of risks in a project?
Okay, it's like Jim said, with putting the data in correctly. You don't have to necessarily know the tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen right quick. Okay, and
we are visual people.
Okay, so can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the Imagine It BIM 360 Hub, and I just kind of put this together right quick to show that we can track the risk, mitigate the risk of the projects, the design, the quality, safety, and data. Okay, and you can see we've got a large list of projects here, and we see the new food mart. Okay, it shows it's a medium risk. Okay, so if I want to look at that, I'm just going to jump right over here. Our risk of the food mart, okay, and this is the risk, saying that we've got one high risk subcontractor. So if I just click there, it's going to tell me the subcontractor, what the high risk is, the risk issues, and water risk. Okay, so it's going to take those, and again, here's some more.
So you're saying we are our own problem in this case?
Well, for this demonstration, yes, we've got a big problem, but we can go back and track every subcontractor. Okay, every time a delivery is late, we can track that. If it's going to involve us having to shift teams around, let's say in area A, where we're supposed to get the sprinkler system done, but we didn't, and the electricians can't go in and do their piping as long as that water pipe is up. And so we can mitigate the risks and the safety issues as well. And so by going through the safety, we've got 3 high risk issues on safety, and I'm just going to pull those up and look at them. The ladder, it's a fall risk. Secure and stabilize the ladder. So at some point we're walking through where we're doing a punch list or an inspection, and saw, oh, these ladders are just kind of in the floor in the middle of nowhere. So we need to make sure that those ladders are secure, or up on the second floor of the scaffolding, or somewhere where they're going to fall on someone below. Okay, and we can also put positive observations in as well. So instead of it's always, oh, well, this is unsafe, this is unsafe, we can come back and say, hey, we've seen this, and the access and egress, it's the housekeeping, practice of good housekeeping. It's a good positive thing. So we can analyze that data in several ways, and at the end of the day, we can send the reports out. And okay, there were no reports written for.
Hey, with access permission.
So, and so we can write our reports out of our details, our checklist summaries, or do we have issues? We can go to just open up all the issues in the project. Okay, so yeah, question?
So as we're looking at this then, all of the data that we've got here is still reliant, I think I kind of referred to it before, but it's reliant on people collecting the data. True. I mean, we're not yet to the point of having, putting a camera in the corner of the job site, and it identifies that Bob is off in the corner taking an unwarranted smoke break next to an open container of fuel. I'm just making stuff up, obviously, but we're still very human reliant in these types of things. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's a very fair statement. It's the software is driven by people and how they're trained to use the software. Okay. I'll go back in history a little bit. When we went from paper drafting to AutoCAD, okay, we took the same process that we had on paper, but we were using a puck to draw everything instead of a pencil. Okay, and when we go from paper analytics to digital, we're still taking that same process. We're not changing that process. We're just changing the tools to use it to create the analytics with. And so it's still the people that drive the innovation.
Okay, so that actually goes back to one of the questions we have in the Q&A that's coming through here, trying to fit some of these in as we're going along. Right. And there was a question from Harry saying, do you think there's a disconnect between people wanting to use the digital data tools but not actually realizing it's up to them to interpret the data? So I think that fits in closely to what you were just mentioning, but do you think there's a disconnect? Have you experienced any sort of a disconnect like that, of people saying, yeah, this is great, but then not actually using the tools that are out there that they should?
Oh yeah, as I mentioned, I had my superintendent, who would not go digital. So I took his iPad off the wall, bought him a clock, put it on there, and I taught him how to use it. And then he was the biggest advocate after he was properly trained on how to use the software, how to use the tools. But I think the disconnect is people are afraid that with the technology, it's going to cost me my job, or it's going to take over. A lot of times in sales presentations, our presentations are so polished, and all the buttons work. And well, of course, if you've done any technology presentations, it won't work during the presentation. And so they see this and they think, oh, well, all I have to do is push the big red button and it gets done. And, there's that disconnect of, no, you need to learn, how to input the information, not necessarily
right.
the whole program, but just your portion.
Yeah. Now, I'll take a little bit of, go ahead, Jim.
I would say, I feel like the biggest disconnect is the apprehension of learning a new platform. Kind of like Norm said, I mean, if it's once you realize that the processes aren't necessarily any different. I mean, the great thing about something like BIM 360 is that it doesn't change how you work. It doesn't change what you've always done. It's just a different tool. You're using a pen instead of a pencil. So the biggest apprehension that I've found is that not, being afraid to open it up and how do you use it. Once you understand the tools, and these tools are very easy to pick up and learn, you're just applying the knowledge that you already have, the way that you've always worked, just a different environment. So I wouldn't say, to go back to the question specifically, I think the disconnect is simply that apprehension and that fear of, oh man, is this something that I don't know how to use?
Right. Now, I will add on to that, just personal side, is when we're looking at these things, whether it's some level of AI, machine learning, of finding patterns in the reports that you have, or automating various processes, there is certainly that idea of maybe sometimes there is something that's as easy as that one big red easy button to get things done. It may not always be something that's immediately available in whatever software solution you've got in place, but there are going to be times where you will certainly be able to identify, here is our process, and we do these things time and time and time again. And then because we do these things time and time again, we can turn around and say, well, let's automate this so that there's some business logic, or however you want to phrase it, going in there, where we can take input A, process it, and get out to the end, and have it be something that's scheduled on a regular basis, or as simple as an easy button, so that you or your team don't have to constantly go through this process, whether it's something in the design side that you're doing to try and get a better design to make the construction side better, or something in construction. We've got a piece of software called Clarity that helps with design automation. We've got software that helps out with synchronizing data between various systems, because you're not always going to use one unified system. There's a project we worked on where there was a customer that needed to take work order information from one system and synchronize it with a different one, because the people working in this project just needed to use two different systems. So we synchronized the two, and you don't have anybody manually retyping any information into these systems. It can be done. There's some effort sometimes that gets into building that easy button, but some of that can be done. Not everything yet. There was one of the questions that was early on from Andrew of, do we think the use of data will ever improve to the point where seemingly impossible things to predict now will become predictable? My opinion on that would be certainly over time, sure. How long that's going to be, that becomes a little bit more of a challenging piece to interpret the timeline of it all. I would say certainly some things like everything that's facing us right now with COVID is encouraging that process to move along a little bit faster than it might have done otherwise. People are realizing that they can work in different ways, and it is possible to do things in a different way and be effective, efficient, profitable about it, as opposed to the concerns that were always, that's different, we don't want to go there. So people are being a little bit more open to possibilities. Now, is it going to be something where you can say, going back to that ladder thing, will it be able to interpret that? I'll keep on picking on this imaginary Bob person, but Bob is going to bring a rickety ladder into the job site and we shouldn't allow that. Yeah, maybe not, but then again, maybe. Because if we have a series of observations over time that every time Bob's come onto one of our job sites, he's got this POC ladder that's coming along with him, maybe we'll identify that and say, this future project, we brought on Bob as a subcontractor, and hey, there's going to be some ladder issues that we need to be worried about through here. So what might not seem to be predictable today might be over time later as we keep on collecting this type of data.
Yeah,
So
Joe,
yeah, I agree, Joe. And I was going to say that almost exactly your example is that because we have the ability to look at a picture of all of our data historically, and it's all collected and it's all being analyzed, we can look at it and say, you know, these top 3 or 5 issues have been factors in the majority of our projects or in half of our projects with these, whatever the case is. So it does give you the ability to start to predict what could be. It's not necessarily what's going to be. None of us can predict what's going to happen, but there are factors that you can look at and say, you know, this is something that points to this might be an issue.
Yeah.
It kind of goes. So one of the other questions in here was to give an example of best practices you found when it comes to actually taking action based on that data. Well, it kind of goes along with what we're talking about. The action that you take, I suppose, again, we're not necessarily changing what you have done, or we're not telling you how you should be taking action or what it is you should be doing. I guess the answer to that from my point of view is you have to decide for yourself, what is the action I want to take? We can provide all the data. We can provide all the information, and the tools can provide a wide breadth of information beyond what you've had in the past consolidated. But it's really kind of up to you to choose what is my course of action. What are the tasks or the things I want to do next to, you know, what do I want to do with that data? So
right. Well, and there may even be places where the results of that analytics can say, hey, here's what we found. Here are some suggested courses of action. You can choose one of them or something completely different or nothing based off of what's the right thing to do for your particular environment, and taking some additional context, that human element, into place instead of just being automatons going, and I did that because the computer told me to. It's like, you know, following your GPS and it doesn't have the roads right. Well, you got to have some personal investment into this. Right. You're not driving into the lake. So I guess maybe throwing this back out and talking about something more in the specifics, is there anything from this, from a risk and piece, maybe Jim, maybe Norm, but that could help out with aspects of scheduling? You know, because one of the things that I've certainly heard time and time again recently, again with COVID, is when we're scheduling things and working on getting things happening on the job site, we have to take extra concern now to minimize the number of people that are on site at any given point in time to maybe a higher level than before. If we have fewer people on a job site, it's going to be less dangerous. That's just a natural piece. But various tools, are there tools, whether it's this BIM 360 thing or other parts, that what can we do from a scheduling standpoint to help out with that aspect of risk?
Go ahead, Norm. I don't want to cut you off.
No, I was just saying, yeah, through the BIM 360, you can set up your schedules. You can say, you know, we're going to have mechanical in third shift, and we're going to have electrical in second shift, or you know, you can start pulling that out. And with the COVID, I know of one subcontractor. They actually invested in HoloLens goggles, and they were pushing that data back to BIM 360, thus reducing people on the field, you know, in the job site, because one person's with the goggles and he's looking at the model, he's looking at the construction, he's going through and he's marking, okay, you know, issue here, and it's being translated back to the BIM people. Right. So there are ways, especially you know, with the COVID, to reduce the number of people on the site, reducing the risk of safety hazards. So
Well,
Right.
shoot, even online in meetings like this, it wouldn't have to be investing in a whole headset
Right.
rig, but even phones, tablets, something with a hotspot, internet connection, whatever, to be able to share and say, hey, I'm looking at this thing, and be able to do some of that in more of a live sense. That's a
Yeah.
lot more feasible than people might have
Well,
thought. Go ahead, Jim.
I was going to say, in the spirit of mitigating risk, you kind of back up a little bit and go to the pre-construction side of things too, and that's as important, if not more important, than a lot of things during the job site. But in pre-construction, if you can go in and you can use BIM 360 for things like coordination and clash detection and understanding construction sequencing along the way, whether it's through BIM 360 or tying into Navisworks and BIM 360, we can mitigate a lot of things, and we can stop a lot of things from actually taking place. A lot of those risk factors, a lot of those safety issues, we can control a lot of that up front because we understand what the data is.
Right.
So I think that the pre-construction part of it is just as important in BIM 360 as the during construction.
Right. Well, and pre-construction being one of those places, if we're talking about it from clash coordination, for lack of any other term that you might want to throw out there, there's been, sure, everybody's got stories somewhere of finding that proverbial column going through a toilet or whatever, but there's also an aspect to that when you're talking about sequencing. It was a number of years ago, but there was a piece, and maybe this is kind of alluding to the next panel discussion that's coming up soon, but there was a piece that went to court where in the model, everything came through and looked beautiful and assembled correctly, and it all fit, but nobody took the time to say, here's the order that you have to put everything in so that it can fit. And so there's a sequencing piece that was missing from it. It's like, it can be there, but if you do it in the wrong order, you're going to have to rip things out. And because, of course, something did go in the wrong order, who's responsible for the cost associated with ripping things out so you can put it back into the correct order? So if we're going through that pre-con process correctly, it's not only just where are the clashes, but what are the requirements of, before I get to placing this piece of equipment, this duct, this conduit, this whatever, what do I have to have in place before or after that, so we do it in the proper order and get things done and reduce or hopefully eliminate any rework that might be happening there.
Yep.
Cool. We're quickly getting to the end of the time that we've got through here. So I know that there's a couple of questions that came through that we haven't directly addressed, and I'll apologize for the people that input the questions that we did not get to, but I want to be respectful for the following panel discussion that's coming around. But maybe, Norm, starting with you, any final thoughts or wrap up summary comments that you have on best ideas, concepts, things that you'd want people that are listening to this thinking about risk in construction that you'd want to communicate?
Yeah, I mean, in the pre-con stage, like you mentioned a minute ago, set that schedule up to where everything is phased and sequenced. And, we've all seen the video of the building in China that went up, what was it, 19-story building, went up in 7 days or something like that. But it was all, slot A to hole
Right.
B, and it was all put up like that. And so as you're going through and putting your programs together, look at that schedule and think of how, to mitigate the risk that's going to be involved in this construction project, and say, okay, we can put area A, we can put all the columns here, and then move to area B while they're working, electrical, HVAC, whatever trade is working in area A, and sequence that, and set it up in your checklists. When you set up your program initially, say, I want these checklists to go area A. Is it complete? Is everything complete in area A? Do we need, more pictures, more information? Get that information in pre-con, and then the construction is going to go so much easier.
Cool. Jim, how about you?
I would say with closing thoughts as we're sitting here talking about all this, the biggest thing, again, going back to that word we talked about, apprehension. Just don't be afraid to get in there. One of the nice things about BIM 360 specifically is that almost nothing you put in there ever actually goes away. So if you ever delete something or you break something or you do something, we can almost always get it back. You can almost always restore something. just don't be afraid to set up a dummy project even and just start clicking around and pick and just, learn the software. Again, it's just a different tool to do the things that you already know how to do and you're already a professional at. And it's just a different means and methods of performing the functions that you currently do. So, just don't be afraid to get in and use the tools, and you'll find a huge benefit on the back end of it. So
Gotcha. I guess summarizing from there, my thought on that would be just taking it from the concept of it's got to be good data coming in. Mm-hmm. Similar to what Norm said, we need to have those good checklists. So take some time. You've probably got a lot of things. If you haven't moved digital yet, you probably have a lot on some sort of a paper form that we can just directly translate into whatever other system that you're using that can store it better. But as you're doing that, what are the places where you might not be gathering all the data that you could? Have that concept or that thought in your head of, if I could do something different, if I could do whatever, what would it be? Am I considering all of the appropriate players inside our construction projects, or do we need to consider some of the different vendors or suppliers in ways that we didn't before, of scanning the barcodes or QR codes as things are coming in for material management? And the list goes on and on and on through there. But as it sits right now, as my personal thought is, that low-hanging fruit that we're looking at is, let's make sure we get those checklists correct and do them. It's pretty easy, just grab a phone or whatever and say yes, no, 5, whatever you've got through there. Take a picture, talk into the phone to get something, but let's capture that good data so that you can then turn around and use it for human or construction AI analytics. And that's where the value will come through to you. You'll see things that you may not have expected, and you'll hopefully see a lot of things that you were thinking were true, but now you've got some empirical data here to prove it out and make appropriate business decisions to have things go smooth. So that'll be just some thoughts on mitigating risk and things that can happen. It's all about the digitalization of what we've got going on. Also, thank you very much for everybody hanging out for this part, and let me turn it over to the next crew for panel discussion 2, legal.
Thank you, everyone. I'll just wait until my panelists connect, but yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, certainly this session continues on, and I was listening, and I know you were touching on some of the points that we're about to raise, I hope, now in this session. So we have 40 minutes again, like the previous panel. So I'd like to welcome onto the call and the panel now. We've got May Winfield from Bureau Happold Engineering in the United Kingdom. We've got Adrian Wildenauer, who's from the Swiss Federal Railways. And we've got Brian Skripak, who's from Canon Design in the United States. So by all means, do share your cameras if you haven't already. We have some set questions. Obviously, we've thought about what we might talk about already. So clearly, I'll start with them, and we'll do introductions first. But likewise, just to encourage you to ask questions. So this is a Q&A as well as a panel session. So please do write the questions down, and I'll see them, and I'll put them to the panel as we go. But if I could just start with the panelists, if I can, May, if we start with you, please, and then Brian, and then Adrian, if you just give a introduction to yourselves, your background, and just very briefly how you got into today, which is we're talking about the legal aspects of BIM and how you find yourself in this position. So over to you, May. Oh, we can't hear May. Sorry, May, we can't hear you. If I just go over to you, Brian, just while May sorting out her microphone, if you don't mind, over to you, Brian, just briefly.
Yeah, can you hear me, Stephen?
I can indeed, yeah.
Okay, all right, good. Yeah, my name is Brian Skripak. I'm with Canon Design in the US. We're a large architecture, engineering, and construction firm. And my real interest, or my role as the director of virtual design and construction, and my real interest has always come at BIM from a project management and planning standpoint, and really trying to follow how we create a strategy to deliver our projects using this technology, but really have it clearly defined. One of the other roles I have is being part of the LOD specification team through the BIM forum here. And I think and I'm sure we'll talk about that later as we talk about terms and planning, but really being able to clearly document what our expectations are and help educate our PMs and client leaders and project teams on how to communicate this new environment that we work in.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Brian. Adrian, over to you, and we'll come back to me. But Adrian, if you just give a brief background and introduction to yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you.
You pronounced my name almost correctly, so no worries.
I did a little bit of homework there, but I knew I wouldn't get it quite right.
Good
so
to know.
Please enlighten us. Yeah.
Sorry for the complicated name. No. I'm Adrian. I'm a civil engineer. I'm working for the Swiss Federal Railways. We are one of the biggest clients in Switzerland, and we are spending approximately 5 billion Swiss francs a year, mostly on construction work, and we heavily promoting the use of BIM from a client side. I'm the disciplinary head of standard and guidelines and dealing with all the stuff, tackling around BIM and some legal issues as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Jokes. May, I don't know if May is.
Hi, Stephen.
Oh,
can
you're
you hear
here.
me?
Oh, it's okay. Yes, we can indeed.
Amazing.
So, yeah, no, you're with us, so that's great, and I can see you as well, so that's great.
So
yeah,
as
just
with all technology, if
know,
it doesn't work, turn it on and off again.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I agree. So just an introduction to yourself and welcome.
So I'm a senior constructor. I've been a lawyer for about 17 years. I've been involved in BIM and related technologies since about 2011. I've written and co-written various reports on the area. Most recently, I led a team which has produced a standard form for the ISO 19650, the international standards. And I've spoken across, well, probably before lockdown in Berlin, Porto, Johannesburg, and yeah, it's something which I spend a lot of my personal time on, I would say.
Great, thank you, and welcome to all of you. Just for the benefit of people watching, my name's Stephen Eglinton. I work with an organization called BIM Enable. So we're an information management consultancy. My background's in engineering, particularly the rail sector. And now I'm a BIM tutor as well. So certainly not a specialist in the legal aspect, but the international standards, certainly I know back to front, at least word for word, and a consultant. So I'm certainly interested to learn more as well, because I often get asked about this topic. So like I say, we've got some questions, but again, just to encourage people watching to ask us questions. So we're lucky to have the panelists for 40 minutes today. So if I just throw it out there, the first concepts that we thought we would talk about is how should BIM be incorporated into contracts? What BIM document should be actually and contractually rather binding? So what document should be contractually binding? I'm happy to throw that out to all the panelists as it's the first question. Who would like to go first? So again, just to reiterate, how should BIM be incorporated into contracts, and how should the documents be contractually binding? A fairly broad topic, because arguably that covers everything we're talking about, but are there any reflections on that or anything that any of you would like to say to begin with? So any of you to start with, who's got a burning?
Well, I think the big thing is it has to be outlined. I think what we typically see, and in the U.S., it's typically focused on the printed, stamped and signed documents as your deliverable at the end of the day. And the contract or an RFP or an RFQ is typically silent on how you get to that deliverable and what the reliability of the digital content that creates that deliverable at the end of the day. There's an assumption that says, oh, you're probably going to do BIM, right? So you use a software and you create those. And I think the further delineation that we need to see is, what does that actually mean? As far as the second part of the question, I think it's interesting. What we've seen in the U.S., and I can remember at a BIM Forum conference, Renee Tijan from the VA, Department of Veterans Affairs, actually coming out and saying there's going to be a time in the near future where our contract deliverable, or speaking to the AEC community, your contract deliverable will in fact be the model, not the drawings. The drawings will have to get submitted for AHJ review and things of that nature, but we want to see the model, and the drawings need to be a direct representation of the model. That language is now in place. We actually have a project that we just started that actually has that set in place. And that's very much the minority in the US, but it's a huge step moving forward that is really going to set the benchmark for how we see that progress with other clients in the future.
So the model as a contractually binding entity, that's what's being delivered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Brian. Is there anything from May to add on that, particularly around the model deliverables?
I'd say in terms of the contractual documentation, it would really fall in two camps. One being the contract section, the legal bit, so copyright, liability, who's at fault if something goes wrong, and who does what. The other section being the more technical aspect, so what do you call your models and so on. And one thing that I've noticed is that the first section often gets included in contracts, although sometimes as a one line you will do BIM, but the second part doesn't. So thinking about the BIM execution plan and possibly parts of the EIRs. Now, the trouble with that, and I have seen it happen over the years multiple times, is that parties can wake up one day and say, well, actually, I'm not going to comply with the BET because it's costing too much or it's not really working for me. I am just going to do what I normally do. So I'd say both sections do need to be binding. How that applies generally depends on where you are. So for example, in France, you'll have one big document, whereas in the UK, you'll have your BET, your EIR, your protocol, all as separate sections. But bearing in mind the ISO 19650, which I appreciate the US isn't implementing yet, Germany isn't, but those countries that does set out things more in the UK style of separate documentation. And when it comes to models being deliverables, I have seen that more and more, and it does make sense. But parties do need to make sure it's clear which takes precedence, because generally clients will say, well, I want the model, but I also want the drawings as well. But sometimes it's sensible to say, and your drawings will come from the model, because they don't always, whilst that wouldn't make sense, that doesn't always happen.
Yes, it's an obvious logical step, but maybe not something that happens in practice, particularly if they're outsourced or subcontracted, I guess. And that's the risk. So yes, thank you. Is there anything to add there, Adrian, just on the one, how do we get BIM into contracts, and perhaps what the deliverables are is the topic that we've moved on to as well.
Yeah, we maybe have a special consideration to make at SBB. We are a public client, so we have to comply with the public procurement law in Switzerland, and therefore we don't have the possibility to tell the planner or the contractor how they want to plan or how they have to plan a specific project. It's called the freedom of methods for planning and construction. So it's a bit different. We are not ordering BIM models. We are ordering data out of the models. So that's a bit different, and it's a bit, let's call it a bit more easily to check later on, because not all clients in Switzerland are aware of the massive amount of data they get when they just order a BIM model, or even worse, just ordering BIM. What happens quite a lot at the moment in Switzerland.
So it's more granular or
yes, exactly,
disaggregated potentially,
yes.
or okay, that's interesting. And so thank you. I guess the questions will also hopefully flow on as well. I think one of the comments that we've already got here is how many BIM terms do not have legal or contractual meaning. So such as BIM level 2, as is, depending who you're asking, and compliance with the BIM standards. Obviously, this originates from the United Kingdom.
Is it a question to guess how many?
Well, I guess your comments on it. Yeah, I guess this is an open question. But any of you again, just to comment on that. So again, just to reiterate for people listening, what BIM terms do not have legal or contractual meanings, or your comments on that?
I would suggest that none of the BIM terms have accepted or understood legal meanings.
Sure.
or accepted in industry meetings. If you put a room full of 100 people, even from one country, and ask what's BIM and what's level 2 or what's digital construction, every single person is going to have a different view. And that's why it's very important to contractually specify it. So level 2, for example, level 2 means everyone's going to provide certain models and they will federate them, or whatever it is. It almost doesn't matter as long as it's what do the parties think it means. But until, certainly in the UK, we would need case law, but internationally, the standards do not provide specific legally binding definitions for anything, I'd suggest.
Maybe
It's
Dan
kind of buzzword bingo, as we call it. There are a lot of definitions around, or pseudo definitions, which are not really legally binding. For example, the BIM dimensions, 4D, 5D, 6D, ND, up to, I have seen 14D last week.
Oh, really?
and the guy is offering me, wasn't able to tell me what he's delivering, so it's a bit difficult then, if even he doesn't know what to deliver. So yeah.
So the dimensions.
Well,
thank you, Adrian.
Yeah.
I'd say even larger scale terms like LOD. Just the difference between what we would say LOD means here in the U.S. versus what you're experiencing in the UK and across Europe. That's a big one as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think people have to realize as well. I've had quite heated debates with people I know in the industry who say, well, it's very clear what level 2 means. Level 2 is what is in the past 1192. But obviously, from a legal perspective, when do you know you've done everything you need to comply with something that just says, give me level 2? And I think it's that uncertainty, which obviously you're going to spend a lot of time and money arguing that you're right.
And just very briefly, because I'm sure we'll come back and conclude at the end around the international standards, but just maybe because of obviously I know your involvement in the UK, is it easier, in inverted commas? Are things rationalized now with ISO 19650, particularly part 2, and it being more prescriptive in the sense of we have clauses? Just a brief answer, I guess, for now. Is that helping?
The ISO is a lot more detailed than the PAS. The fact it's international as well, it works in theory, obviously, across jurisdictions. And so it's clearer what each party is supposed to do and when, or what they need to consider. But obviously, it's not legally binding. It still needs to be incorporated by contract. And you have the expression that's going around of provide BIM according to ISO 19650, which is no more special than saying you will provide level 2 BIM. It doesn't, unless you define that, it doesn't actually mean anything.
Same in Switzerland, yeah. Totally agree.
And maybe so in Switzerland, is there anything to elaborate on that? Just about any challenges around specifying that in your sector?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same what May just mentioned. It's just not ordering BIM via ISO 19650. We have to be very specific in our contract documents what we really want, what we really need, and how we prove that later on in terms of quality gates, in terms of how do we get it over into our asset information model, and etc. etc. So we are moving from a very general ordering to a very specific data handling and data ordering. So that's quite a shift, and it was fired by the ISO 19650 and their approach. It's a bit different than the former Swiss approach.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anything to add, Brian, just on the level of detail / definition, as we might say in the UK, but just, I guess, on that note, so in the theme of what we're talking about defining, and I know this could be more than one webinar on its own if we start talking about level of detail, but just briefly, anything to add on that, because it's different in the UK. There's some of the main challenges, or maybe how you've overcome that, or
well, I think the big, I think kind of the comparable story to what May talked about of saying requiring BIM level 2 is saying the architect and engineer will provide an LOD 300 model. Well, an LOD 300 of what? and the creation of that as an inclusive statement, as opposed to understanding you're developing individual assemblies and components and assets of the building to a specific LOD, and not really generating that holistic statement, and not having an understanding of what that means. The other thing we often see is, I'm going to get an LOD 500 model at the end, which there's always the unicorn aspect of LOD 500, and, understanding that in the US, per the BIM form specification, it's not a progressive development of a model element. It's citing it as a field verified representation. And so I think the terminology, people use it very interchangeably, and that's part of one of the complexities and challenges that we have is baselining that knowledge so people do understand what they're asking for, and clearly understand what they're delivering.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess just paraphrasing a part of what you said there, I guess the implication is with a level LOD, whatever it is, 500 something, the implication is that it's been through them checks. It has, which is, I'm just paraphrasing obviously of part of what you said, and that's, you can't guarantee that, and that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a question, if I can, so we'll come back to any thoughts we'd had previously, but just to open up a question from the people watching the audience there. It's a question for Charlotte. Would you agree that having BIM to be contractual can actually put people off using BIM as they feel forced to use it? Any comments? Who has an opinion either way, that if we contractually oblige people to do it, it might be negative or put people off?
I can just tell you an anecdote. Some years ago,
Please.
when we ordered BIM in a construction project, and we ordered BIM, well, not BIM, but specific BIM quality gates, most planners said, no, we don't want to be transparent, and we don't want to be checked on a daily basis by the client when he looks into our models and in our data stuff, etc. So, well, it really depends on the people you're engaging. So, but some companies still are reluctant to change. Let's call it that way. So, but yeah, I don't know how long they will survive without using digital methods. To be honest, I don't know.
Is it either Brian or May? Have you got anything? Just any comment? Maybe you don't, but just on that point, I can imagine what you're going to say, but just just so people at home are clear. Yeah, sorry, go on.
I have heard that argument a number of times over the years, particularly at the beginning. It was just let the industry do work itself out. However, I think unfortunately it's one of those things like collaboration, saying, well, you should just do it, but if you don't put it in the contract, how are the parties going to know what exactly each other wants, unless you're just doing it internally? And even then, if you're doing it internally, I've seen situations where, say, an architect's doing BIM, and the client says, well, that's really useful to me. Can I have copies of all your models? I know the contract doesn't mention it, but we're all friends. Let's all, let's all share. And the lawyers will obviously say that's a really, really bad idea. But if you have it clear in the contract, at least it shouldn't stop things, I would say. You can still innovate.
Brian, I will move on. I won't labour this point, but any comment? Is it a bad thing that we are trying to put it?
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that's where we need to go in the future. I think there's an additional level of accountability that I think design professionals at this time are still holding on to the comfort that I can make the drawings look right, and that's what I have. And yeah, the drawings came from the model, but then I can do whatever things I need to do to clean it up. And it's just a model. It's not part of my deliverable. So I think that's always the common exchange, is you revert back to that comfort level of, this is what I'm required to deliver, so I'm going to do that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. There's quite a few questions here, actually. So just leading on, if I just read out the next one, regarding legally binding models, How do you treat a model where the client's BIM auditor accepts certain parts of the model, yet rejects others?
You would, that isn't that different from dealing with drawings in reality. I think people kind of get caught up in the fact there's a 3D model, whereas at the end of the day, it's a tool to look at what's been done. And then this is where all the documentation comes in. Which stage of development is it? So are you supposed to just look at those bits because the other sections haven't been checked yet? And it shouldn't be more complicated if parties are clear what about the process.
Any comments, Adrian or Brian? So is what if only parts of a model, in whatever sense people might interpret the model to mean, say if some are rejected, some are accepted? Any comments on that?
I agree with what May said. It shouldn't be any different. You've not met this deliverable expectation. My experience with that has been more on the end of working with clients to define a standard and say what these deliverables are. But that's in a case where at the inception of a contract, it says must adhere to the standards in the BIM project delivery standard. Now you've outlined that and you say very specifically that, you know, room information needs to have this. These particular assets about the building need to have these parameters. So when you run a check and it's not completed or incorrectly formatted, it's very directly stated that you were intended to meet this and you didn't. I think that kind of goes back to probably what Adrian's saying too about the data side of it. It's very, very direct to be able to say yes or no, has something been completed and is it the format? The gray area, well, it's not really a gray area, but I don't see that people are saying, well, this element isn't at LOD X. This is really a 200 and I need it to be 300. I haven't seen that type of dissection of deliverables yet. It's really been more about the data side.
Is there anything to add, Adrian? Maybe we've covered the points already.
I'm not sure what the difference between a paper drawing and a BIM model is nowadays, to be honest. It's just a deliverable, which is agreed on between two parties, to be honest.
I agree. So, yes, thank you. There's a few more questions, but maybe if we pick up one that would talk about sort of ahead, just we've talked about most of them already, but one I just highlighted there was how can we ensure that everyone in the value chain is aware of their legal obligations? So we've kind of alluded to this, but maybe not addressed it. So everyone in the value chain, especially planners and construction companies, are mostly aware of their obligations in terms of data security and data safety. So I guess changing the theme, how do we make sure the whole supply chain is aware of the data governance aspects, particularly security? Has anyone got any thoughts on that or any case studies they can share?
Well, it's mostly about education, to be honest. We have to as a client, we putting a lot of money into the training and the development of our planners and contractors in order to foster innovation and to enable the planners to get along with the pace we are giving at the market at the moment. So it's about education, and one result, in my opinion, is that we should concentrate on new contract models. At least in Switzerland, I don't know the situation in Britain or in the US, but I think we are not focusing enough on the 3C, as I call it, the communication, coordination, and collaboration in our contract models at the moment. So I don't know what it is in Britain, but I think similar. I fear it's similar.
May, have you got anything to add? I don't want to get it wrong.
We are moving on towards a more collaborative model. We haven't quite got to a stage of multi-party contracts, but certainly when you look at the way contracts are drafted, and particularly the BIM sections of it, there are collaborative elements, even if it is everyone's going to sit around a table, a virtual table nowadays, and talk to each other once a fortnight, and those sorts of things which will flesh out problems. But yeah, the I would say the contracts look quite different from they did, say, 20 years ago. But it's the mindset. The mindset obviously has to change. I think our industry is a little bit adversarial, and people aren't necessarily used to sharing information. I remember when the BIM mandate first came in 2011, and everyone was quite horrified at the thought of having to share their models and all their sort of inner workings. And there was a lot of pushback, whereas now obviously it's just business as usual.
Thank you. Anything to add?
Yeah, I think
just to remind people, sorry, just what listening, it was how do we ensure that everyone in the value chain is aware of their legal obligations? So, sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, outside of the documentation, I think the evolution for the industry is getting into an environment where we have more collaborative project delivery models in place. I mean, especially when, I know in the U.S., design bid build is so predominant, where the architect and the engineer are under contract, and then you put a set of documents together, it goes out to bid. Now the contractor's saying, hey, I'm on board, great, let's get that model. Well, that wasn't part of my deliverable, and you immediately have that breakdown. And that confrontational environment, like May said, so now you're saying, well, it's not my contract. Sure, I can collaborate, but I wasn't asked to. I'm not being compensated for it. I don't have a reliability set forth for what you can do with it. Here's my disclaimer that says eventually you can get it, but you can't do anything at all with it. Don't call me. And that whole kind of that becomes the common ground, instead of having more, whether it's multi-party or design build or progressive design build or some of these other arrangements. Then you can really have everybody at the table at the outset and clearly define what you're going to do and how you're going to accomplish it. That's where the real value comes in.
Yeah, great. Thank you all. And like I said, we've got quite a few questions. We don't have too long. Time flies. We have maybe 10 minutes left. So there's a question from Steve here. It's to you directly, May. It says, hi, May. It doesn't give me the surname. You might know this person. I'll tell you afterwards. Anyway, it's from Steve. Hi, May. You said that none of the BIM terms have legal meanings. Do you still think this will or should change? I think we've probably covered that, but is there anything to add? How will we change it? I guess if I paraphrase that, we've said there's challenges. How do we change it?
I suppose because when I say it doesn't have a legal meaning, it to me it is, if you went to court and your contract said you will deliver level 2 BIM, full stop, and there's nothing else, and both parties will have experts which will have a different view on what level 2 and BIM means to have complied with the contract. Now, that is the problem. So there's no understood meaning. There's no meaning in a standard that says level 2 means this and one sentence. It needs to be interpreted. So, but it's different from saying, does it have a contractual meaning? Well, yes, if you put it in a contract, then it has a legal and contractual meaning as between those parties. And I think that's the best way forward to avoid having that argument.
Keep it specific. Thank you. I'll move on, if I can, just to the next question as well. So thanks for that. This is for everybody. Is confusion around the terminology is going to get worse now the conversation is turning to digital twins? So I was going to avoid talking about digital twins, but just throw it out there. Any comments? We're talking about BIM, digital construction. I like to talk about digital engineering. Now we've got digital twins, which any comments around the terminology generally, but particularly digital twins? Brian, Adrian, particularly?
Well, yeah, Eastman wrote in 2011 that the term BIM is a popular buzzword used by software developers to describe the capabilities that their products offer. And I think now it's a time to describe the digital twin the same way. So yeah, it's, for me, it's at the moment, don't get me wrong, it's a marketing buzzword.
Sure. Any comments, Brian or May, on that one? Just around.
Sorry for being honest.
No, that's what I want. You might want to not say anything, but it's just picking up new terminology. Digital twin. Does that help?
Put it in the bucket with everything else that needs defined.
Sure.
It's a bit of catchphrase bingo.
Yeah.
Now, 5 years ago, everyone said BIM, whether they actually meant it or knew what it meant or not. Now everyone's replacing it with digital twin, and digital twins are amazing. There's so much potential. But again, if you have someone say, I want a digital twin, the latest McKinsey report that they just issued this month equated BIM to, they said, delivering BIM in brackets digital twin. And I would say that it's not the same thing, but even in a report of obviously a very respected organization, they don't necessarily see the difference, and which just shows how much confusion there is.
Yeah, I guess I'm the moderator, so I won't say any more, but just a quick thing is the levels, the maturity levels, as we're in the UK. Certainly, I've seen many times the conflation between the levels and dimensions, 2D, 3D, 4D,
14D.
whatever, 14D, not gone there. The triangle wouldn't fit on my page normally,
Okay.
so that's why I've not gone there. I need a bigger screen. So thank you for that. Another question. This is open to everyone. We've only probably got 5 minutes left now. Apologies. What are the drawbacks you've faced in BIM's legal aspects where you've worked? So, what are the drawbacks you've faced in BIM's legal aspects? So we've probably touched on these, but I guess, are there any negative, paraphrasing that perhaps, are there any negative aspects of BIM that, is it making it harder? I know I'm paraphrasing that question, but are there any thoughts on that?
I would suggest that one of the negatives, not so directly, but is that people don't take the legal side seriously enough.
Okay.
It's considered,
Absolutely.
well, it's a technical thing. I mean, years ago, when I used to go to conferences, I was told, well, you're a lawyer. Why are you here? It's a technical aspect. And because there's not been, no one's lost a lot of money in a very public way in the various disputes going on. So it's parked. And we still see so many contracts, they do some BIM. And I think that's actually one of the biggest problems.
Yeah. So, anything to add, Brian, Adrian, just about the drawbacks? What is BIM helping everything that we want to look at?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. It's saying do BIM is a cavernous term. I mean, that's a catch-all of everything, and there's nothing. It says a lot, but means nothing specifically. And I do think from the outside of projects, getting people to clearly define that is a challenge, because I think it's often looked at as, we're building a model. Sure, that's how we do business. Yeah, we got it covered. But what does it really mean? And there doesn't seem to always be the level of seriousness about planning for that legal contractual language until it comes into play and somebody asks for it and they say, whoa, that's not what I was supposed to be doing. So it needs to have that same importance defined up front, and not just kind of be set aside. Oh yeah, we're doing that already. It's fine. We don't need to worry about it. There's nothing there. But even if there's not something written in your contract about it, you should still be, or there's not an expectation, you should still be defining what you're doing and have that set forth. And I don't think that always happens.
Thank you. If I can just bring a new question on to Adrian, if I can, just in the interest of time. The question from Wendy here, do you think the legal side of BIM can keep up with the continued advances? Often it seems that the legal side is always playing catch up. Your comments, Adrian?
Well, it's true. Yeah, at the moment, there's a very speedy development of the technical stuff and all the tools which are developed every day. So law can just be, grab the stuff afterwards. So yeah, that's true. But I think there will be soon, hopefully, a settlement in terms of data handling and data ordering, hopefully. So knock on wood.
Is there any comment on that, either Brian or May, just on the how do we keep up? I mean, we know that, you know that anyway, but I guess it's just a reflection on, how does the legal side keep up with it?
I think lawyers are necessarily reactive because they're limited by what the client's asking them for. But lawyers are not necessarily very technically minded, and they will, so a lot of lawyers still don't understand BIM, and nor do they necessarily need to. They don't need to know how Revit works, but there needs to be possibly a bigger drive among the legal community to get up to speed with this. It's not going to go away. And ask the clients, tell me, when I do training in the industry, I often say, tell your lawyers what your problems are, and then they can help you resolve them for you. If you don't tell them, they don't understand your industry. They don't understand BIM. You have to tell them the risks. So it's a learning process, I think.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Please, you go.
It's an important point of collaboration, and I'm not a lawyer. I know nothing about that full ramification of things, but having a collaboration with our legal counsel at our firm has been really beneficial. And while it's easy for somebody in a BIM leadership role or a VDC leadership role to talk about we need to do this, having your legal counsel on board and having them understand what the downstream impacts are really allows you to hit the people who need to make this happen at a different level. So they're hearing it multiple times, and we're very fortunate that our legal teams are on board and are understanding and have worked to be proactive and collaborative about defining what these are. So as we move forward, we continue to do that and grow and make sure that language is in place and it's integrated into the specifications as well as the document management. So it's important.
Great, thank you. We're right up to time. However, maybe if we can just summarize just very briefly, there's obviously things we haven't gone through. If there's any questions that are outstanding, then hopefully kindly the panelists will answer them directly and we'll take them offline and email people. So there's a few outstanding. But if I can just ask the panelists just to finalize some sort of feedback about, if I am either the client or the owner of the asset or a contractor, whoever I am, what are the three, just as bullet points, high level, what are the three things I should, so if I was going to search on Google, for example, what are the three terms I should be looking for to learn more? So what should I be searching and where should I go? Likewise, are there websites or other places I should go to learn more on this topic? So if I start with you, May, if I can. So what are the three things I should be looking for, or where might I go to learn them?
I think you need to understand what the basic BIM contract documentation consists of.
Yeah.
The ISO 19650.
Yeah.
And to be honest, also if there's any specific things in your country that are peculiar the way your the industry works. And on the first two, I would suggest that the UK BIM framework website's a good one, just because it lists some guidance we produced about the ISO. I appreciate it's UK specific, but it's still just interpreting it, as well as the protocol we wrote, which is compliant. So it kind of gives you a feel for both areas. And when it comes to the last point, it's always useful to read what's in your local industry press. People do tend to write about all the hot topics quite a lot, I think.
Great, thank you, Brian. Where would I go if I want to learn more? What's your recommendations, and what should I be searching to find it?
Yeah, I think in the U.S. we have the AIA's digital practice docs, the AGC's consensus doc 301 BIM addendum, and the DBIA has their BIM exhibit. I think contractually those are the three big legal documents that are there now, but also really understanding the BUS National BIM Standard and the BIM Forum LOD specification, and understanding that vocabulary is setting expectations is important.
Great, thank you, Brian. And Adrian, where would I look for more information to learn more?
I have to blow our own trumpet. You have to look at BIM at SPV, our company website, of course. Yeah. And I would search for data quality about the ISO 19650, as May already mentioned. And I would be searching for an IDM, information delivery manual, how to deliver which information to whom by when.
Great. Thank you. I'm afraid we're out of time and we've run over. Like I say, there are some more questions, but we will try to get them answered offline. So I'm certainly personally interested in this. We could go on, but we'll have to leave it there. So thank you very much to May, Brian, and Adrian. I appreciate you taking your time, and thank you. And with that, my name is Stephen Eglinton. Again, we'll hand over to the organisers. So thank you all, and thanks for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you to everyone who's joined us today and to the speakers as well. You will all receive a link via email to watch this session on demand. For those who've had questions unanswered, we'll send these to the speakers and publish their responses on our website. Our next webinar will take place later today at 10 PM UK time with a presentation on using risk analysis to track project execution performance. Thank you all and see you soon.